risk quantification and optimization, reducing the randomness of risk response, and generating economies of scale with your MSSP business model. That and the latest news and trends in the managed security space coming right up on Cyber for Hire. Building bridges between managed security providers and their clients, it's the podcast where MSSPs, vCISOs, and end users take a united stand against cybercrime. This is Cyber for Hire. Struggling to monitor the growing threat landscape, pressure to reduce costs, security skill gaps, facing compliance issues? These issues can translate to operational, financial, regulatory, and reputational risks to your business. Checkpoint can help. Checkpoint combines an MSSP enablement program, cloud-delivered multi-tenant management, SOC platform, and superior threat intelligence capabilities to give MSSPs the confidence to grow profitably at a reduced risk. Checkpoint is 100% channel-driven. We partner to deliver the best security everywhere. Visit msspalert.com/checkpoint. All right, welcome friends to episode number 25 of Cyber for Hire. How's everybody doing today? I'm Bradley Barth with SC Media in New York, and joining me today, just a 3-hour drive away on I-95, is my guest co-host for the day, Jason Albuquerque, Chief Operating Officer at Envision Technology Advisors and co-host of the Business Security Weekly podcast. Jason, glad you could join us. You know, earlier this month, I took a little road trip to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which you might know is a pretty major hub in the robotics industry. Obviously, robots and AI, very hot topic right now due to security concerns around connected devices and machine learning. So you might be interested to hear that when I went to Pittsburgh's Carnegie Science Center, I actually met a couple of robots. So, so I sent you an email, and we'll insert the image into the show later. Tell me if any of these guys seem familiar to you.
What are they? What are those robots?
Okay, so you don't recognize any of them. So the first one with the red blinking light, that's HAL. That's HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Yep.
I mean, he kept calling.
Very
cool.
Yeah.
So, and he had little messages coming up on the screen. He kept calling me Dave for some reason.
Really?
But like, HAL really is the perfect retort, right? To anyone who says AI, what can go wrong, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, we know he basically, he was basically the one of the first, killer robots, basically, or artificial intelligence. The other two guys, or robots that are both in the same picture there. One of them is the robot from Lost in Space, the Danger Will Robinson. And then, of course, you have Gort from The Day the Earth Stood Still. So a real oldie classic there.
Very cool.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite movie robot?
Do I have a favorite movie? I don't. Honestly, I'm not super into robot movies at all. I'm more of a Marvel guy. So the closest thing to a robot would be Iron Man.
Okay, fair enough. Or Vision, maybe. Yeah. All right. Well, more discussion coming up later. But first, some news just can't wait, which is why we want to share what's top of mind today. So here's your headline, Jason, courtesy of MSSP Alert. A newly released report from Mandiant warns that a suspected Chinese cyber espionage campaign has been emailing malicious file attachments to organizations in order to exploit a zero-day vulnerability in Barracuda Network's email security gateway. Mandiant's chief technical officer called it the broadest cyber espionage campaign conducted by a China Nexus threat actor since the Microsoft Exchange compromise of 2021, which affected tens of thousands of machines. This latest campaign has been going on since October 2022, and among the hundreds of victims are various governments and foreign ministries. Barracuda users are encouraged to investigate and hunt for compromises. Jason, why is this top of mind for you?
Well, breaking news. So I filled in on Paul's Security Weekly last night, and this was a topic that we covered. Now they're coming out saying, Barracuda saying clients need to replace all of their hardware appliances. It's unfixable. They tried to address it via multiple patch cycles. The malactor still persisted. And now they're actually coming out saying replace all of your ESG hardware appliances. And the ramifications are huge. I mean, it started off with a tar file attachment that allowed the malactors to execute a reverse shell payload. From there, they went in and had, a Trojanized module for the SMTP daemon and created some backdoor functionality there that allowed them to execute commands, upload, download files. They also had a persistent backdoor that allowed them to communicate to command and control. So very, very high risk to organizations. Some of the latest data, a third of the victims have been public sector, so government entities. And at this point, as an MSP, if you're supporting, Barracuda, it's replace the gear as quickly as you can. That's the mantra at this point. Replace.
Okay.
Now, I don't know, and we talked about it last night, whether or not Barracuda is offering any type of, financial reimbursement for this or any type of incentive for this. I haven't seen any news yet, but I would recommend if you're a Barracuda partner, talk to your partner, your account executive, and your partner representative and figure out how you can replace this gear as quickly as possible.
Yeah, good advice there, because it would certainly be interesting to see if there would be any kind of compensation they would offer there. Obviously, the response now more drastic than perhaps we initially thought it would be.
Yeah.
So Thanks for that analysis, Jason. And that's going to be our top of mind hot take for the day. But now it's time to move on to our InfoSec news and trends topic of the week, presenting our big idea in security: risk quantification and optimization, reducing the randomness of risk response. Risk isn't a static measurement. Threats like malware campaigns, vulnerabilities, human error, and unreliable third-party partners can fluctuate in their severity depending on ever-changing circumstances. That's why knowing which risk is of higher priority at any given time can allow MSSPs to dynamically adjust their prevention and mitigation efforts for both themselves and their clients. But which sources of risk do you measure, and what factors go into such a calculation? How frequently do you remeasure? And upon learning the latest risk scores, what are sound tactics for prioritization and response? This session is going to explore some of these big questions surrounding risk quantification and optimization. To discuss this further, we have an excellent guest who is always a pleasure to talk to. He is an author, speaker, and consultant, Ira Winkler. Ira is director of the Human Security Engineering Consortium. He is the current VP and field CISO at CYE, and he was the founder and president of security awareness services firm SecureMentum, though in this appearance today, he'll be representing himself, not any of his professional affiliations. Ira was also formerly the chief security architect at Walmart. You may have read his books, You Can Stop Stupid, Security Awareness for Dummies, and Advanced Persistent Security. Ira, thanks so much for joining us, as always.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Again, you did used to work at Walmart. I'm not going to ask you to comment directly on what went on there, but I did recently visit their headquarters earlier this year, and I spoke to one of their senior directors who explained how Walmart's risk and compliance department leverages threat intelligence data and proprietary algorithms to assign quantitative scores to potential sources of fraud and cyber criminal risk in order to optimize their response. Everything from malware to third-party partners, employee risk. And the pie in the sky scenario, he said, would be if every executive came into Walmart and they could refer to this real-time stock ticker that tells you where your risk is at any given moment. Obviously, that's a bit of daydreaming, but how frequently should you as an organization be refreshing and recalculating your organizational risk?
So there are different layers of organization risk that you really got to look at. At a high level, organization risk should not be something that changes drastically from moment to moment. That's one potential issue. At the same time, we're talking organizational risk versus cyber risk, which is a distinction. I'm going to assume that most people listening to this webcast are going to be primarily concerned with cyber risk.
For sure.
So if we're talking about cyber risk, one of the issues is, in general, cyber risk should be kind of relatively stable, where you have a program in place that understands what the quantification is, that understands what the exposures are, what, probability of something being exploited, and so on, and that should give you some element of your risk. Now, at the same time, where a lot of these quantification programs fail is they're not dynamic enough, for example, to take into account what is the exposure. So you were just talking about, for example, a new attack against Barracuda equipment. If you have that Barracuda equipment in place, you all of a sudden, out of nowhere, have a very serious threat. So in some cases with cyber risk, you're really talking about looking at threat intelligence and incorporating that into your program. For example, I heard this before I joined Walmart, so I will give you this example. And it's something throughout the industry. It's not just for Walmart. But Walmart does have a very good cyber threat intelligence program. And if there is a credential dump put to the dark web, for example, let's say a bank is compromised, not Walmart, just some random bank, and the credentials are dumped, all of a sudden Walmart knows, wait a second, we might have a bigger threat. And why would some bank credential dump all of a sudden impact Walmart? Because we know users are going to essentially reuse user IDs and passwords. So there is a distinct threat not just through Walmart, but throughout the entire retail sector, the banking sector, anybody who does internet e-commerce. All of a sudden, you know that the criminals are smart enough to do. God, all of a sudden I'm on air and I forget the term, but essentially replaying all the credentials against every major retailer, and every major bank. And so that's an example where you need threat intelligence because your threat does go up. And likewise, when you have a new vulnerability that's all of a sudden out there, if you have a new threat actor, like for example, if you happen to be in the energy sector, and there's a new threat actor that's effectively targeting the energy sector, you want to go ahead, and that increases your cyber risk. It increases your cyber risk exposure, and it increases changes how you do cyber risk optimization. Because all of a sudden, a very low priority threat or low priority vulnerability might become your top concern because of what's going on in real time. But in general, though, as long as you have a good program in place, your cyber risk should be relatively static unless there's major changes to your organization.
So Ira, I know as cybersecurity professionals, we've always had challenges with quantifying the risk to the business. Mm-hmm. Folks haven't done a really good job of proving out risk. What are some suggestions I can get? Because I know professionals who've gone out and tried to get investment, and then there's different priorities in the business that outweigh this cybersecurity investment. Mm-hmm. What are ways that professionals can do a better job of articulating risk to the business, mm-hmm. so that way they can get the investment, articulate that they're reducing risk in a monetary perspective? Because that's what the CFOs are going to look at. That's what the CEOs are going to look at.
Right. So I've said since I wrote my first book in 1997, Corporate Espionage, you can look this up, I had a whole chapter, and essentially the book was on risk as a whole applied to cybersecurity, which wasn't even a term back then, which I'm really dating myself now. But anyway, to that extent, I said the major problem with cybersecurity programs is that CISOs get the budgets they deserve, not the budgets they need, and they need to learn to deserve more. One of my friends, and I'm going to use him as an example, Dan Meacham, and I'm going to use him as an example in a good way. I would never use a friend in a bad way unless they were not a friend. But generally, Dan, one day he pulls me over 2008, 2009 at some event. He's like, Ira, let me show you my new iPad. I go, I know what an iPad looks like. He's like, no, it's not the pad. It's an app I developed, or I had one of my guys develop. And he's like, whenever I walk into a budget meeting, I bring this iPad with me. And he goes ahead and he's like, I need, I'm just making this up, $50 million for my budget. And they come back and say, okay, we can only give you 45. And he's like, okay, I understand. And he goes ahead, he opens up his app and then he clicks, okay, 50, now 45, reduction of $5 million. And he's like, okay, according to my calculations, And so for a saving of $5 million on the security budget, you upped our risk by $238.7 million. I just need you to sign here. And then he had a signature block on his iPad for them to sign to accept this $238 million risk. He got his budget. Because, and to this day, I'm pretty sure that was just a random number generator, honestly. It might be more, but the guy's smart. Now he's CISO of Legendary Entertainment, one of the smartest guys I know in cybersecurity. And, that's how he went ahead and did it. Now, with the cyber risk quantification tools, I must admit, I have a problem with most of them. And, I do work with CYE security, so there's a potential competition. So I just want to lay that out there. But generally, cyber risk quantification tools can be helpful in how they do it. Some cyber risk quantification tools provide you not with a financial data, but they provide you with some magical index score. Maybe it's helpful for your concerns. I personally think it's going to be of limited value. That's up to whoever chooses to buy it for their circumstances. Some other companies are out there and they have actuary data. And actuary data is good because there's some legitimacy to it, where you can go ahead and take this actuary data and say, okay, we have X amount of cyber risk. And some of these tools then say, well, gee, in a company of your size with your industry, we recommend you should have a higher security awareness budget. I wrote security awareness for dummies. That's the stupidest thing I ever heard. And I'm just using that as one example. And why am I using that as an example? Because you don't know the effectiveness. Just saying that other companies spend this amount, so that's a good amount for you to spend, is not a good reason. Like the old saying goes, if everybody jumped off a cliff, would you do it too? And the thing is, it doesn't have a measure of effectiveness. It doesn't have all these other characteristics. And cyber risk quantification tools, they're the latest buzzword. I'm sure Gartner will come out with a quadrant. I think Forrester came out with a wave for it, or whatever the situation is. And those are useful tools for providing pretty pictures to management in the absence of anything else. And I like to take the next leap, which is what I call optimization, because part of the issue, and again, the FAIR model is another thing commonly used throughout industry. And the FAIR model is good, but the problem that I see with it is you have to estimate what is your actual probability of loss. And to ask somebody, what's your probability of loss? If they knew that, we would never have an incident.
Yeah.
So, I like to there are other tools out there that can go ahead, look at, for example, combining your attack surface, looking at how threats get to assets, and then figure out what's the likelihood of them getting there. And there are different tools like Monte Carlo simulations and things like that. And this requires a lot of mathematics. I'm not, this is what I've been focusing on for pretty much a year plus now. I've started writing about it in 1996.
Sure.
And we need to go ahead and say, okay, risk quantification is important. Because here's one of the problems I see with cybersecurity as a whole, going back to CISOs get the budgets they need. Because what's the budget cycle? And I've been lecturing, or not, I like to say speaking. I don't like lecturing. It means I'm pontificating. But when I speak to events, I say, okay, the way cyber budgets are created is that you look at what your budget was last year. You then think, okay, did I get a budget cut? Can I go ahead and get some more? What do I want to do? And then I go in and I beg for money at the next budget meeting. And then they go ahead, like Dan played his game, like, oh, we don't give you 50, we'll give you 45, blah, blah, blah. Maybe they make this arbitrary sanity check. What is the percentage of the IT budget that IT security is, and use that as a sanity check, which again is one of the dumbest things out there. And everybody is sitting there like, okay, that makes sense. But that makes no sense at all. Because what you're doing is you're basing your cybersecurity budget on a random number from the previous year, which was based on the random number from that previous year, which is based on the random number, and so on and so on and so on. And then the sanity check is what percentage of IT is the IT security budget? It really shouldn't matter. Because look at banks, the large bank, especially the large banks, are really, really smart. They don't go ahead and say, what is my IT budget, and let me give that to IT security? Because you're not protecting information technology. You're protecting the services and value provided by the information technology. And a large bank like a Capital One, not trying to point fingers at anybody, but they know that they're not protecting the computers, because if the computers magically go down, they have all the computers, they have all the hardware, all the software, all the people, they have all the buildings, but they're losing millions of dollars a second maybe, or at least a minute. And they know that they need to keep these things up and running. And they don't base it on that. They base it on, okay, what should be the budget to protect the information and services provided by this bank? And then they architect it from there.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry, you haven't asked the question, so I should.
No, it's okay. You were on a roll. We couldn't let break your momentum there. Ira, regardless of what ultimately tool or tactic or approach you take for risk quantification and optimization, if you're an MSSP, there's really almost two angles to this. One, you want to really have your own house in order and recognize risk to your own internal organization. But then, of course, you have your clients. So how easy is it for a managed services provider to leverage what it's already doing for itself in this area of risk quantification and turn it around and apply the same principles and approach to their client base?
So theoretically, it should be relatively simple. Reality, probably not. Because managed services providers, they take, especially managed security service providers, they essentially take their clients, they add them in, they don't understand too much about their business. They just know that they're managing the business, they know they're managing the storage. They probably, in many cases, don't know what's in their storage as much as a company would. They don't know what the critical assets are. For example, if you go to, let's just say Microsoft OneDrive, I'm using the mega example. Does Microsoft have any clue what the clients have? Frankly, I don't want them to know what I put on their systems as a CISO, just as an example. That being said, if you want to help your clients, you need to provide the tools and resources to help them do it for themselves. As an MSP, for example, where are the risks? For example, you have your data servers, where your value comes from, where your vulnerabilities theoretically are, so you know how to contain that. What an organization does, like a client of an MSP, they have essentially outsourced their cyber risk to another party. And should they know what that risk is? The answer is probably they should. They should know what is the value of risk that they've cut down, because, a lot of companies, it's no secret that most cybersecurity firms, top-notch cybersecurity firms, are using MSPs for their own services. They're using Microsoft, Google, or whatever for their internal architectures, and that's great because these companies have good postures. Other MSPs, likewise, assuming they have good programs, can do it better than all these other vendors because it could be much more tailored and responsive to people. However, I guess I should go beyond that, because you're not just going ahead and doing the storage, you're also doing the management of systems as well, so I shouldn't leave that out. But you need to go ahead and probably figure out how are you doing cyber risk optimization, and hopefully you're doing optimization, not just quantification, and bringing it to your clients and potentially offering that as a service. because you never see a more ungrateful client than one who experiences an incident after you've warned them about what could go wrong if they don't take additional services or do additional measures.
So what are some of the most important things to get out of the gate that an MSP can do? It's a lot of times we don't have full visibility into the client, and we don't have all of the asset classifications that we should have, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, for an MSP, it's know your client's assets, know how they're classified, know the risk that those assets bring to the business, start to learn your client's business, and then from there you can start giving them good advice on risk and start having the conversation around risk management. But I think a lot of the basics aren't happening.
Well, I think a lot of the basics don't happen. And in many ways, because I was a CISO of an organization that was an MSP. And, frankly, we tried to help our clients, which were at the time mostly government agencies and things to that effect. And they had their own people in place that did what they did, and they outsourced the risk to us. But there's a limitation to what, because I wish every MSP would offer the services to help their clients do a better job understanding the risk. But to a large extent, an MSP is, I hate to say, much like a gas station. And the way I describe it as I love analogies. If you don't know me, you know I'm an analogy person. And the reason I say a gas station is because when you go into a gas station, you're putting gas in a car. And for example, if you go ahead and somebody puts diesel gas or regular gas into a diesel engine, the nozzle is not the same size, so there's one protection mechanism against it. But if somebody drives into a gas station and puts the wrong gas in their car, they potentially have a problem. Then you have other people who put in premium gas, and their car doesn't need premium gas. It's optimized for regular gas. And but they buy premium gas because they think it works so much better. And they have some people who need premium gas that use regular gas because they have a $100,000 car and they're cheap bastards. And this is kind of in many ways the description of an MSP client, where you have people who want premium services they don't need, and frankly, good for them, especially with cybersecurity, because every so often, if you're going to waste money, waste it on extra security, in my opinion, because it's usually not that much of a waste. Yeah. Then you have some people who you really recommend, you need the premium package, and they're like, no, we're not going to bother with that. We don't need all that extra EDR stuff. Then something goes wrong. The car breaks down, or the car putters or something goes wrong, and they get hacked. And then they're like, how come you didn't detect my people downloading ransomware? It's like, because you've refused the EDR package, And this is the same thing. And so when you're an MSP, we have to focus. Because here's the problem. Do I want an MSP to really funnel their clients with proper cybersecurity as a whole? The answer is yes. Is that the primary function of an MSP? Unfortunately not. A lot of MSPs, if they're smart, they offer extra services to provide, almost like a doctor taking care of the whole wellness, not just taking care of the cough they come in with. And that's what a good MSP should do. But a lot of clients don't want to hear you need to exercise more and lose and eat less, for, using lack of a better term. They're like, well, we'll manage your systems, but we really should add the cybersecurity package to you. We really should add EDR proactively. They're like, well, no, I don't really want to put the cost into it. This is where you kind of got to go ahead and have a more consultative sales approach, and perhaps identify where their industry has previously failed, and where, for example, they had companies that were shut down because they didn't go ahead and have EDR in place, as an example. Where they didn't have hot spares and hot backups as part of their services as well. And how they could be, if they have an incident like ransomware, which is unfortunately not uncommon. If you look at the data breach report, I think it's like 80% of companies had some form of ransomware. I don't think that's the right number, but it's either way, it's not insignificant. And we need to highlight to people, because doing cyber risk quantification, fundamentally, unless you have a truly consultative approach, you're not going to have the data to be able to do cyber risk quantification and optimization properly. But you have to work around that. You have to, again, take like what a good cyber risk quantification optimization tool would do and bring in actuary data, bring in case studies that show where an organization can fail and be able to present it to make the business case, because you're probably not going to be able to take a generic MSP client and get the data you need for a good providing of a dollar value, right? I hate to say you have to kind of scare them, and I don't really think it's selling fear. I think it's frankly selling reality. And too many of us have this whole thing like fear, uncertainty of doubt, security theater, and all that crap. The fact is, things go wrong. It's not fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's frankly certainty for me that without proper security, all the statistics say you will be screwed.
Right.
We're selling facts.
Yeah.
And no, some vendors are horrible. But the reality of the situation is, it's like, look, you can listen to me, but the reality is every 50% of your industry suffers a ransomware incident once a year if they don't have EDR in place. And frankly, many suffer it with EDR in place, but it helps to minimize the exposure that they have and minimize the risk, and keeps them from, and basically stops their whole organization from going down to keeping a little piece going down.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's quite all right. So we're a little long on time, Ira. This might be a tough assignment. I'm going to ask you maybe if in 90 seconds, I have one last question for you on this. We'll keep it to 90 seconds, which is, we talked before about measuring risk across a number of different categories, malware, third-party partners, your own internal employees, exploited vulnerabilities. Sometimes it can feel a little bit like comparing apples to oranges. Is there a way to aggregate all of that different risk data and basically calculate it all together, or do you really have to quantify the risks of each of those categories separately?
If you're going to do it accurately, you need to do it separately. If you want to come up with a good value, you really do need to go ahead and figure out, okay, what is my risk exposure from, ransomware in general, all these sorts of things. On the other hand, if you're able to get actuary data and look at the probabilities and figure out, okay, from a statistical historical perspective, what have been traditional risks, which is what a lot of data looks like from insurance companies, you're going to be able to go ahead and get aggregate data. Otherwise, you really have to, if you're not going to use these tools, I have my preferences, obviously, but if you're not going to use some of the tools that are available, you're going to have to generate your own numbers. And if you're going to broadly generate your own numbers, you're basically going to say, okay, what is the value of my entire organization? Because pretty much the value of your entire organization these days in just about any organization is going to be protected by your cyber program. Maybe except you could take out all, like, let's say you have a company that has trucks. Take out the value of the trucks because the trucks will still be there. Take out the hardware. But if you have information and services, got to figure out, okay, that's the maximum value you have. And then look at things like the Verizon data breach report and then figure out what's the probability of an incident happening. And then multiply that by, the total value you think you have to lose. Again, I recommend the tools because this isn't an easy thing. That's why these tools are now existing. It used to just be kind of somebody making up numbers. Now we have a lot of vendors making up numbers with software that looks a little more legitimate. But anyway, people can contact me if they want more legitimate stuff, but that's a separate thing.
Absolutely. What's their best way to contact you?
I would say LinkedIn, Ira at Ira Winkler on LinkedIn.com. I think I'm one of 2 Ira Winklers on LinkedIn.com, so it makes it easy. And then my website, irawinkler.com, has a contact me number, or you can just email me, Ira at irawinkler.com.
Perfect. All right, before we go, Ira, let's just get to know each other a little bit more with a segment that we like to call We Speak Geek. This is a show and tell type game where we embrace the geek culture that people typically associate with the cyber nerd community. Because at the end of the day, everybody's a little geeky about something, right? So, Ira, we're definitely short on time, so we're going to kind of do this as a little bit of a lightning round. But I would love to know, how do you speak geek?
We speak geek.
I speak geek. Frankly, you can't just, I just do it naturally. I wish it was. If you're a true geek, it just comes out of your mouth randomly. You know, it's like all of a sudden I'm sitting there talking about, okay, what do you like to do? It's like, well, oh my God, there's a Charizard at the checkpoint or something like that. You know, I play Pokemon Go, I admit it. You know, things, it's just a natural thing because I just can't shut it off.
So Pokemon Go for you is the thing that you're particularly geeky about, if that's top of mind for you.
Unfortunately, yeah, I love traveling. I love seeing the world, but unfortunately, it's a lot easier to play Pokemon Go than to hop on a plane to Thailand.
All right. So I will tell you real quick that a few years ago when I was working in the old offices in New York City, and I had a colleague at the time, and he ended up, as I best can remember this story, I believe he kind of showed up a little bit like late and out of breath to work one day. And he was like, oh, man, this was like, what a crazy day at work. Like, I was on the bus, but then I saw a Charizard on my Pokemon Go outside the bus. I had to hop off the bus and chase after the Charizard. Then I had to walk the rest of the way to the office. So that's a dedicated Pokemon Go player right there.
I unfortunately feel his pain. True story, and we can go, but I was once traveling to Vienna, Austria, speaking at an event, and I decided I wanted to see downtown, and I was just sitting on the bus for like a half-hour train ride or bus ride because we were there. And all of a sudden, like Pokemon Go has different Pokemon in different regions frequently, and all of a sudden, a new one popped up on my nearby screen. And I like just jumped off the bus at the next stop, and then it was and then I like followed where the Pokestop was, and it was in the middle of a United Nations compound, and they wouldn't let me on the compound, and I was trying to negotiate with the guard to get on there.
And telling them that like the white whale of Pokemons that you needed to capture was not convincing enough to let you inside.
I go, I'm just trying to get into the park you have here. Look on the map. He's like, I don't know about this map. You know, like
that's hilarious. So this is a common occurrence. People just like jumping off of public transportation to hunt down Pokemons.
Well, unfortunately, there are people falling off cliffs to hunt Pokemon. I'm not that bad.
Okay, well, we're glad that hasn't happened to you, Ira. Thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to speak to you. That's going to wrap up the first half of our show, but please everyone return for the second half of our episode featuring our big idea in business. That and more coming right up, so we will see you in a moment on the other side.